It's very clear to everyone right now that Vladimir Putin is sitting back and planning something. Ever since the neo-Nazi fascist coup backed by NATO took place inside of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin has been skillfully crafting his response. This is a move by US imperialism, and as a result he has to make a countermove, given how much vested interest Russia has in Ukraine and the surrounding area. It is good to see from what we've witnessed so far that the old political skills of the KGB have not left the man. Due to Russia's refusal to cooperate with the US interests in Ukraine, the West has responded with a tactic designed to weaken Russia's economy. Oil prices via supply have been manipulated by companies aligned to the US, dropping drastically. This has had a significant effect on Russia's revenue, as oil and gas are a big part of it. Putin has been smart enough to counteract this manipulation by taking the same strategy that Gaddafi did before he was killed by US imperialism. He has been trading oil for gold as well as gas. It should be noted that this is something very far from being some kind of anti-NWO action. Despite what a lot of people think, fiat money is not some kind of evil conspiracy by the Illuminati. The world's reserve currency is the US dollar. A great deal of the world's trade is done in the US dollar. And because the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, and the United States controls that currency, that gives them a hell of a lot of power in the global economy. Given that they're now attacking Putin by placing all kinds of sanctions and whatnot on Russia, it's a good idea that he gets out from under that the best he can by going with a commodity that has more value than the US dollar and one that is much more difficult to manipulate: gold. Now, this doesn't mean that Russia is not taking US dollars for oil and gas. They are taking it, and then immediately, as quickly as possible, converting that into gold. Right now, gold is lower in price than it has been since the hyperinflation hysteria put out by gold bugs in the media only a few years ago. Putin is essentially snatching up gold while the demand for it is low to be utilized later. Gold prices have fallen about 7% since October to trade around $1,160 per ounce, and the asset class is expected to post its second straight yearly loss. The precious metal has bounced since hitting a 4-year low, but sentiment remains weak. By the end of last year, Russia has purchased 55 tons of gold. Last year, the central banks of all countries combined purchased 93 tons according to official data. Now, this is some serious hoarding of gold. What Russia's done here is very smart. Russia knows for a fact that Europe cannot get by without its energy resources, particularly gas. So people are going to keep buying it because they have to buy it. So they're either going to buy it in gold or they're going to buy it in US dollars, which Russia is going to turn around and convert into gold anyway. Now this fact probably has to do with a large part of the Scottish independence movement not being successful, and any fraud that may or may not have happened with that, because I don't know. Scotland has a huge amount of untapped oil resource, and that would be a pretty good reason why the UK would want to hold on to Scotland, to try to use that in the future by at least an estimated by 2025 to try to undercut the importance of Russian oil in this conflict. Now, add on top of that, the US gets 19%, a huge chunk of its uranium from Russia as well. Every 6th light bulb in the US depends on its supply. That's money the US has to give Russia. This move essentially moves Russia slowly out from under the US dollar's dominance. If anything were to happen to the US dollar, Russia would be in good standing with so much gold in its reserves. The US loses the ability to a large degree to mess with Russia's economy because it can't manipulate the gold as well as it can its own dollar. Meanwhile, China is also taking steps to remove its dependency on US dollars. China hasn't stopped taking US dollars, but it's been using them to purchase gold and currency reserves. Where they're going is they're stopping the increase of gold and currency reserves dominated in US dollars. That is, China will no longer buy US Treasury bonds for dollars earned from trade with any countries as they did before. If China is going to stop trading in US dollars, what is it going to trade with? Most likely the dollars coming from trade, or a substantial chunk of them, China will quietly replace and de facto is already replacing with gold. Relations between Russia and China right now are extremely good. China is buying up oil resources from Russia in gold, and Russia has plenty of it coming in. That means now trade can take place between the two countries using gold or other currencies and completely bypass the US dollar. This will, in effect, tend to minimize the power of the US dollar and weaken it to some degree, because any currency, even gold as a currency, is only so good as long as people are willing to trade with it. And right now, gold is better than the US dollar because it has some kind of utility outside of trade, particularly when there's some kind of force that is beginning to undermine that. Now, what's really important to remind people here is that Russia and China aren't buying paper gold. They're buying physical gold. Now, there's a very serious difference. The market for paper gold is actually fairly large. The market for physical gold is much smaller. The difference being paper gold is a certificate that says you own a particular amount of gold, usually denominated in US dollars. So if you have a US gold certificate, that means somewhere in some vault, somewhere in the world, you own $1,000 worth of gold. 1,000 US dollars worth of gold. US dollars, which may become worthless someday. What these two countries are doing is getting physical gold instead. That's worth a hell of a lot more, because the US dollar can tank, and say $1 worth of US gold is a single grain. But if you still own a gold bar, you still physically own a gold bar. And that's what's important to keep in mind here. These two countries are doing something that seriously undermines the power of the US dollar and is giving them a lot of leverage. One of the theories of imperialism that has been touted by Marxists over the decades has been the theory that there can arise a multipolar world where there are multiple imperialist powers competing for dominance, and that there may always be a case where these multiple powers come up, and then you have the inter-imperialist rivalry, which leads to a recurring cycle of world wars. And after World War I and World War II, with the writings of Lenin and Mao, that seemed very true, like that was going to continue. But there's a new phenomenon that's taking place here. Large groups of capital are largely dependent on, were based on nation states, according to Lenin. There was the capital of the United States and the capital of Germany. Capital is now so big that one investment firm has stuff all over the world. There are many companies that have a huge amount of holdings in the United States, the UK, Germany, and Russia. The whole point of capital is to constantly expand. And if we're talking about the 1%, to use a liberal term, we're talking about people who have, about almost half the world's wealth. With this having taken place, we can hardly call this capital national anymore, as these groups of capital, according to whatever business or whatever holding, etc., now exist as an international entity, which means they don't have a vested interest in seeing Russia go to war against the United States. One side or another is going to lose, and in either case, that global capital is going to lose. One of their investments is going to be destroyed. This is very far from the old idea that we've been given by conspiracy theorists that they push wars in order to make money off selling guns, etc. Now, that may have been true at some time, but capital is now so international, it's really not all that profitable for it anymore, because it has much more to lose. Sure, it could make a lot of money off of that, but it would lose a lot more in the destruction of the country. Unless, of course, you're talking about a country that isn't flooded with foreign capital, particularly that very powerful capital. Say countries like Iran, or North Korea, or Cuba, or Venezuela. That would be very profitable for capital to incentivize us to go to war with. because not only could they make money off the war itself, but they would have gigantic brand new markets from which they could invest and get a return. When we consider that, we start to see a little bit more why it's these countries we always have to go to war with, even though they essentially don't pose any threat to us whatsoever. And when we understand this context of capital as it functions in the global economy, we get a better understanding of why it is the world is flowing the way it is, and why this doesn't necessarily flow with what Mao and Lenin wrote. Because since those men's days, the early 1900s of Lenin or the 1960s of Mao, capital has changed immensely since then. The world has changed. The power of capital has grown exponentially since that time. So to simply use the theories of capital put down by Mao and Lenin are out of date. They are a great basis for learning. But the world has changed since then, and a new understanding of global capital is needed. And that is the weakness that a lot of Marxists have today. When it comes to imperialism, the primary contradiction in the world, their minds are still stuck in the early 1900s or the 1960s. The world is very different from then, and what we need is a new theory of global capital now. If you like this video and you'd like to see more of them, then head over to my Patreon page and show your support. Or you can go to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available. Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and share on various social media.